hello everyone, this is Jonathan Rizal, and today I'm going to be discussing with you your 4.5 chapter 4-5 reaksi penduduk tempatan terhadap penyerahan Sarawak. So if you need a little recap for chapter 4, the first thing we learned 4.1, we learned about BMA, the British Military Administration, and we learned about its weaknesses because it failed to protect the Malayan people. Then after you move part 4.1, the introduction of the Malayan Union in 4.2 arrived, and where in 4.3 you then learned how people were going against it, cara bantahan. Alright, different types of people, your kings, your raja-raja, and your masyarakat tempatan. Then we come to 4.4, where instead of talking about just Tanah Melayu, we're now exploring Sarawak, where the introduction of, where we also discuss about the Brooke family, the Raja Puteh Brooke, and how they are going to menyerahkan Sarawak kepada kerajaan British. And here we're going to talk about the reaction of the people towards this particular act. So the person currently in charge of Sarawak is your Charles Viner Brooke, CVB, and he's not willing to give it to his heir Anthony Brooke, which is a nephew of his, and thus is giving Sarawak to the hands of the British. So let's see, what is the people's reaction towards this? Now, if you look over to 4.5, we first bring it to the factor. And there are two sides of the argument. There are the people who support this, menyokong penyerahan Sarawak, dan menentang penyerahan Sarawak. So let's talk about the menyokong, because this is the minority in a sense that we have more to talk about regarding menentang than menyokong. So menentang is just three simple points. Why did some people, some of them rakyat tempatan, support the penyerahan Sarawak? Number one, because they believed that by giving Sarawak away kepada kerajaan British, hal ini demikian dapat memajukan negara, allows to make the country prosper. How so? Because penyerahan ini dapat memajukan from what ways? Majukan perhubungan. Perhubungan means connections. And this means perhubungan, aspek politik, aspek perdagangan, aspek pertanian, aspek pendidikan, dan kesihatan. In a way, you're trying to say that with the act of giving Sarawak over to the British kerajaan, you're helping the country develop in plenty of ways. Now, all of this you have approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you have 6 points. If you can nail down at least 3 or 4, you'll be good to go. So after here, by allowing you to memajukan all of these different aspects of Sarawak, you dapat meningkatkan taraf hidup masyarakat. You get to increase, you get to allow the people to live better in a way. And selepas itu, you can also help the fact that after the peperangan, Sarawak memang musnah. By musnah means was destroyed. So I'm trying to say that before this, with the British coming in, they can help to fix what has already been destroyed. And this particular line was said by one of the leaders, Datu Banda Abang Haji Mustapha, which is a member of the Ahli Majlis Negeri. And if you don't know what the Majlis Negeri is, the Majlis Negeri is just a meeting for the people. More of the ketua-ketua lah, the ketua kampung. Now, coming to the next point, not only are you going to memajukan the negeri, but relating to the whole meningkatkan taraf hidup point, you can memajukan penduduk tempatan. How so? See, the people who support the penyerahan, we call them the golongan what? Pro. Pro meaning you support something. Pro penyerahan. So, golongan pro penyerahan, they were like, to show how much we support our decision, mereka menubuhkan Young Malays Association, YMA. Now, for the YMA, what was the reason for even starting your YMA association? Well, you need to know these are youngins, so they do have a more open-minded concept. They're more willing to accept change, and they believe that by opening up your YMA, your Young Malays Association, you can, number one, galak means to encourage, menggalakkan kemajuan. Kemajuan means what? The progress. Kemajuan orang Melayu. And at the same time, membantu orang Melayu yang mundur dan ketinggalan. Mundur and ketinggalan are the same thing. We're talking about people who are left behind on the times. You're not modern, you're not caught up. And kegiatan YMA, your Young Malay Association dalam bidang, let me write the word first. Kegiatan means like not their influence, but their acts. What kind of role do they play dalam bidang pelajaran, agama dan sukan? So they're trying to involve themselves in many different aspects. Okay, sukan. Now, pertubuhan ini menubuhkan cawangan di Cebu, Kelakar dan Miri. With 这个组织, with this particular pertubuhan, it allowed them to open up more places over in Cebu, Kelakar, and Miri. For me, I would remember Cebu and Miri because these locations show up a lot in your textbook. But of course, if you want to memorize Kelakar, that's up to you. Okay, so that's the simple part of this one. Now finally, apabila engkau dapat memajukan negeri, you simultaneously can help the people. And when you can help the people, what's the best way for the government to help the people? Think of it. The people, they need food to survive. They need water, they need a house. And how do you obtain all these things? You do it through money. So how can you get money? How can the government give money without causing like inflation by printing a lot of money? You can't just donate a lot of money over, but what you can do is give them jobs. So by giving up Sarawak to the to the British government, hal ini dapat memberikan peluang pekerjaan dalam perkhidmatan awam. Peluang pekerjaan means the opportunity, job opportunities. See, ramai golongan intellectual. If you don't remember, my intellectual symbol looks like this. Golongan intellectual diberi peluang jawatan tinggi. They were given what? Jawatan tinggi means they were given high positions in the perkhidmatan kerajaan. Perkhidmatan means service. Perkhidmatan and kerajaan means government. So in the government service, they have high positions. Like peguam. Peguam meaning your lawyers, doctors, and jurutera, the specialists. Now, British, they want to keep the people's peace. They want them to be on their side. So British akan memberi. Sorry, let me write the word memberi with my orange. Taraf berkerajaan sendiri kepada Sarawak. Berkerajaan sendiri, meaning you can govern yourself. Sendiri, that means tanpa British as like the full leader. This is not mutlak. Okay? But let's get something very clear before we move on to the second golongan, which is the more dominant one, your menentang. See, when we say that the British allowed them to have the status, taraf means the status, right? Berkerajaan sendiri, you have your own government. Does that mean they are allegedly merdeka? The answer is no, absolutely not. Okay? If you don't remember, in 4.3, we already stated this, Sarawak disahkan was legalized as what? The Tanah Jajahan British, as one of the colonies of British. So just because they're giving you the opportunity to govern yourself doesn't mean you're free from the fact that you are not a independent country, independent negeri. Okay? So from these takeaways, you majukan negeri, majukan penduduk tempatan, and you give them jobs. And how so? Because the government, they can only give government jobs. Now, so the golongan that menentang, what are their reasons for not supporting the penyerahan Sarawak? They are anti-penyerahan Sarawak. One of the more important people you might know is the Dato' Patinggi Abang Haji Abdillah. So, see, the first thing they're very pissed off is about tindakan Charles Brooke bertentangan dengan Perlembagaan 1941. Okay, what is the Perlembagaan 1941? 1941. It's simple. To explain it, you must know that there is a particular rule in this constitution. That's what Perlembagaan means. See, prinsip ke-8, which means the 8th principle. Let me write like that. There are particular rules in here that the Sarawak people were very much looking forward to. Number one, they had agreed beforehand untuk mendapat pemerintahan sendiri. Do you see the difference in word pemerintahan sendiri, ruling, which is very similar to what the British were proposing, akan diberikan kepada rakyat Sarawak. So according to Charles Vandenberg, they were going to give them control to take over Sarawak. Penduduk Sarawak akan dibimbing mentadbir negeri sendiri, negeri mereka sendiri. They will have the ability dibimbing. Dibimbing means what? 被引导, they'll be almost taught, guided on how to tadbir their own state, their own Sarawak. Oleh itu, tindakan Vandenberg melanggar prinsip ke-8. So, when they announced that, oh, actually we're giving up Sarawak, this means that tindakan means the action of Charles Vandenberg was actively going against the 8th principle in this particular perlembagaan. So, the word we use is melanggar. Beliau menafikan. Now, the word menafikan. So, beliau, don't use the wrong word. He's beliau, not your friend. Menafikan means to snatch away. Menafikan. You snatch away hak rakyat. Hak rakyat Sarawak mendapatkan pemerintahan sendiri. By letting the British take over, this is also stopping the rakyat from achieving their own kind of government. So here, mereka tidak dapat pemerintahan sendiri. So that is the first reason on why they're so pissed off. They're like, hey, you're going against the rules. Number 2, Charles Vandenberg, at the same time, he not only offended the rakyat tempatan, but also the particular surat from his ancestors, Charles Brooke. If you don't know the history of the Brooke, the Raja Putihs, the White Kings of Sarawak, it was James Brooke, then his son Charles Brooke, and then Charles Brooke's son Charles Vandenberg. And the line ended there, as we can see. So, what is the Surat Wasiat? You might be wondering. Surat Wasiat refers to the will. So, what's in the will? Dalam surat tu, mereka membuat you means you make the keputusan, you make a decision tanpa berbincang. That means when Charles Vandenberg made the decision to give up the Sarawak to Kerajaan British, he did not. Beliau tidak membuat keputusan, tidak berbincang dengan Raja Muda. With who's the Raja Muda referring to? Let me draw this symbol out. Your next in line, which is Anthony Brooke, the guy that Charles Vandenberg does not like. His nephew. He did not refer to the other family line, and Tuan Muda, which is Bertram Brooke. I can't say his name. Bertram Brooke. So, what exactly happened? Without discussing, the Surat Wasiat basically states that you have to discuss on what you would do with the possible heirs, possible people related to the Brooke family. So, golongan menentang, those that were going against, menentang penyerahan Sarawak, mahu memulihkan. Memulihkan means to 恢复. In other words, you want to restore. Pemerintahan means the rule of Dynasty Brooke. Supaya dapat kemerdekaan dengan mudah. Because by this point, they weren't that aggressive with the current white kings. See, this way they could get their independence even easier. How come? Because we just stated, related to the Perlembagaan 1941. This was going to help them easily get their pemerintahan. But now that we're putting our rule, the control, into a completely different kuasa, you were obviously not happy with this. You just stunted their possible growth. So first point, going against Perlembagaan 1941. Second point, it was ignoring the will of Charles Brooke. And finally, the next factor, which is not so much related to your Charles Vandenberg, which is that Gerard T. McBrien menggunakan muslihat. Muslihat means what? 以欺骗手段, which just means they were using dirty tricks in a sense. So, how come? Well, what are the muslihats we are focusing on? Number one, tekanan means pressure, desakan means you force something, pujukan means you so like, ayah, don't do this lah, listen up, please, you keep bargaining. Dan sogokkan means to bribe. And untuk mendapatkan persetujuan. So all of these methods to do what? Dapatkan persetujuan, to get you to agree with their terms and conditions. Like, come on, agree with us. You want to give Sarawak into our hands. The British, we are better. So let's do a small recap on the faktor before we move on, because the bentuk penentangan will be a longer part. See, factors 2, the menyokong, they believe that this will memajukan negeri, memajukan penduduk tempatan, dan memberikan peluang pekerjaan. And because we're focusing on the kerajaan can only help you in the sense that you work with them. So, perkhidmatan awam under the government. Then to the people who are anti-penyerahan, they are going against menentang. See, it's because Charles van der Broek effed up in 2 ways. Number one, he went against the Perlembagaan 1941, and he went against the will of Charles Brooke. Then we have a man under him, Gerard T. McBrien, who was gaining the persetujuan, which means getting the agreement through very, very illegal ways. So now, let's jump on to the next point, that being your bentuk penentangan. So bentuk means what kind of shape, way or form are they going against the penyerahan Sarawak. So number one, the first thing they did, mengadakan persidangan. Before you do anything, before you make some big gestures and fight and rally up, you need to have a meeting, 会议, okay? Number one, have a meeting. Now, who organized the meeting? Dianjur oleh, this is a name you will need to know, Johari Anang. And you will see his name referred to a lot. See, dianjur oleh him. Then, who's the pengerusi? Pengerusi is how? Pengerusi, it's Johari Anang. Now, what was the objective of having the persidangan? Objective, number one, mengadakan demonstrasi. Demonstrasi of what? A protest pada setiap every 1st of July. Kerana mereka ingin what? What's their title? What are they doing? They're going against, right? So I'm gonna menentang penyerahan Sarawak. Now, pertubuhan yang menyertai. What were the groups that joined? Well, there are plenty of groups, and I'm gonna mention the more important ones. Number one, your pergerakan Pemuda Melayu PPM, your Barisan Pemuda Sarawak BPS, Persatuan Kebangsaan Melayu Sarawak PKMS. These 3 are arguably more important, and the rest are Persatuan Melayu Mini, Kesetiaan Muda Matu, Persekutuan Bumi Putera. So, we just mentioned that they're going to start with protest. They're going to start with a demonstrasi. So, we go to the next point. Mengadakan demonstrasi. Number 2. On the 30th of October 1946, demonstrasi pertama diadakan. So, the date, 30th of October 1946. Now, give me a quick second. So, on 1946, the first ever pertama demonstrasi diadakan. Now, what was so special about this day is because ketika kedatangan Gubernur pertama Sarawak, yaitu Charles Arden Clark di Astana. Now, the main thing you need to know is kedatangan Gubernur pertama. The first ever Governor of Sarawak. Another guy called Charles Arden Clark. Okay. Then, demonstrasi itu diketuai oleh siapa? The name I mentioned before, Dato' Pan Tinggi Abdul Haji Abdillah. So, pergerakan ini disertai oleh 16 persatuan Melayu. 16 different groups showed up. That means they came for the meeting, then they came here. Now, one particular group which I told you before is important, PKMS. See, what did they do? PKMS, which is your Persatuan Kebangsaan Melayu Sarawak, mendesak. Okay, DESAK means to force British berundur, to go home, to return. How so? Here they tell you, kata yang tertulis, they were holding up banners and here they were yelling out, kami membantah dengan sekeras-kerasnya atas tindakan Brooke menyerahkan Sarawak kepada kolonia Inggris. Very long, which means we go against, as brutally, as roughly as we possibly can, against the act of the Brooke family to give up Sarawak to the British colony. And some other lines which are a lot shorter you can remember, like Sarawak adalah hak kami. It is our right. Sarawak is ours. And number 2, like what? Leburkan kolonial. Leburkan means what? To destroy the colonies. And no cession. So, with all of this said, we do know that with the protests, all of these messages, where were they written on? Well, on your sepanduk. Sepanduk, which means your banners and your posters. Anti-penyerahan ditampal di pokok perahu, this is a boat, perahu dan jetty. Dan demonstrasi di Sibu, Sibu, which is a place in Sarawak we just mentioned that you should memorize, over at the top here, Sibu. So demonstrasi Sibu oleh PPM, stands for Pergerakan Pemuda Melayu. Alright, so coming back, mengadakan persidangan, discussing untuk mengadakan demonstrasi, then they have the demonstrasi to do what? The PKMS mendesak British to berundur, and the demonstrasi Sibu happened by the PPM. So let's go to the next point. So you have your protest, and with the protest it leads to the next point. How else can you show that we are going against the British colony? Well, the people decided they would meletakkan jawatan. Meletakkan jawatan means you give up, you quit, you resign, you stop working. Beramai-ramai means a lot of people meletakkan jawatan. They stop working. How so? Well, British menyedari pemimpin anti penyerahan terdiri daripada pegawai perkhidmatan dan perkhidmatan awam dan guru. Meaning that, let me draw here, these are the golongan anti penyerahan. Absolutely not having this bullshit, okay? These people, they realized, came from what? They were members of your perkhidmatan awam. They were of the general service, the government service, dan pada masa yang sama merupakan guru. Dan on the December of 1946 menyatakan bantahan tentang penjajahan Sarawak, dan British mengeluarkan perkeliling or warning notice. So let me write it in yellow. British mengeluarkan means you release a perkeliling nombor 9 pada 1646 tahun, Circular number 6 yang melarang pegawai awam menyertai gerakan anti penyerahan. So they were like, oh no, we're realizing that a lot of them are government workers, so to prevent them from joining, they were like, aha, we're going to melarang, we're going to stop you from even joining as long as you are a pegawai awam. You cannot sertai. So you know what these people did? They were like, oh, if that's so, I quit. On the 2nd of April 1947, 409 orang kaki tangan kerajaan meletakkan jawatan. They quit. Okay, alright, J for now. Guru serta petugas di pos dan telegraf, Jabatan Marin, Kastam, Perubatan dan Kesihatan, Pekerjaan, Jabatan Tanah dan Ukur, Jabatan Kerja Raya, Bomba dan Perbendaharaan all left their jobs. So, he left what? It didn't stop here. 56 orang pelajar. Okay, let me just... Orang pelajar, students, in response to this, decided to quit daripada Maktab Perguruan Melayu Sarawak, because this is a teaching college. Menamakan pengajian sebagai bantahan. They were like, alright, I'm just gonna end my studies here. Bye-bye. As a way to what? the keyword here sebagai bantahan, to show they're going against. Now, talking about bantahan, we're talking about just the general public. We're talking about workers now. Let's talk a little bit more in depth. That was bantahan more generally, people who are working in the government. What about just the bantahan of the golongan wanita? Where are my women at? Okay, where are the girls? See, our golongan wanita juga menentang. So, if they were the golongan wanita, they mostly came from the teachers. So, your golongan wanita menentang, like example, Cikgu Lily Eberwin, who came from what organization? PKMS. What does it stand for? Persatuan Kebangsaan Melayu Sarawak. Haja Sifat Tuanku Osman, Dayang Fauzia dan Cikgu Ajibah Abul, mereka sanggup mengorbankan masa dan tenaga mengatur strategi untuk menentang penyerahan Sarawak. So, all these teachers, sanggup means what? 你愿意 rela mengorbankan masa. Mengorbankan masa means you season, you sacrifice time and what? Energy. Untuk mengatur. Mengatur means to organize your own demonstrasi, which we just talked about, just means your own protest. So, kaum ibu yang diketuai oleh Cikgu Lily Eberwin. So, your Cikgu Lily Eberwin bersama kaum ibu, what they do? Pergi ke rumah panjang dan mengadakan kempen kesedaran. Pergi ke, okay, let me draw this out. Rumah panjang. So they can have what? They can have their kempen kesedaran to let more people know about the issue at hand. Cikgu Ajibah Abul, which we mentioned just now, mengetuai wanita bergabung tenaga dengan gerakan anti penyerahan, memperjuangkan kemerdekaan Sarawak. Okay? Understood here? So, continuing onwards, this is the teachers, they have their rumah panjang whatsoever. So we've talked about the persidangan leads to demonstration coming from the government workers, the perkhidmatan, pegawai perkhidmatan awam, the guru, then from the teachers. Now, let's talk about the influence of the akhbar, of the magazines, of the printing press. So, did they stop here? No. On the January of 1949, which is around 3 years after these demonstrations, Utusan Sarawak, which if you do not remember, we already mentioned, we already name dropped this particular news outlet in bab 2.5. Okay, so Utusan Sarawak diterbitkan, was printed sebagai saluran, as a channel untuk menyebarkan tentangan. Menyebarkan means to spread. Tentangan means their fight. Now, pengarang, which means the writer, menggunakan kritikan yang tajam, sharp critics terhadap penyerahan ini. Ulasan berita tentang tindakan kerajaan British menyekat Anthony Brooke daripada memasuki Sarawak. They're talking about how, with the news that basically the British government was stopping Anthony Brooke from entering Sarawak. Artikel tajuk Kerajaan British menipu rakyat disiarkan pada 7 November 1949. This was a pastoral, but you know that the akhbar always plays an influence. Remember the name Utusan Sarawak. And we are now going to the final point, which is now that we've talked about akhbar, we do need to mention just the influence of paper, of writing things down, specifically writing your surat bantahan. Okay, so see, this is not the final point, by the way, I'm mistake this. So, menulis surat bantahan kepada British di London. If you remember your 4.2, your Raja Melayus did the exact same thing. So, Pergerakan Pemuda Melayu, your PPM, like I mentioned from the beginning, menyatakan bantahan. Menyatakan means what? You speak up. Dan your BPS in 1949. My throat. BPS we talked about also is your Barisan Pemuda Sarawak hantar referendum. Okay, referendum. Now, if you don't know what this means, it is in a sense a way for people to directly vote on important issues and laws. So with the referendum untuk memansuhkan, to abolish this particular agreement, to what? Give up Sarawak. Mereka menghantar surat bantahan kepada Perdana Menteri British Clement Attlee dan salinannya kepada Gubernur. And finally, this led to your Anthony Brooke. Anthony Brooke, remember the nephew who your Charles Vanderbrooke did not want on stage, on the throne. Anthony Brooke also participated. See, what did Anthony Brooke do? Menentang melalui sistem perundangan, fighting via the undang-undang, the law system. So, what did he do? Beliau membuat rayuan, which means an appeal. The Privy Council of the 16th of July 1948 dan membawa kes ke Mahkamah Tinggi Brunei. But did this succeed? Unfortunately not. His case ditolak. It was taken out. They were like, the Mahkamah, the High Court of Brunei was like, no, we can't deal with this right now. So, before you think we're ending, I'm actually missing one particular point from this section, which I argue is one of the most important ones. So let's give it its own section over to the side over here. Ding, ding. We use a strong color. Okay, over here. The final point is menubuhan kumpulan rukun 13. Let's talk. On the 20th of August, this particular kumpulan rukun 13 ditubuhkan. Ditubuhkan means what? Created by your golongan muda, your young people. And this was done secara sulit. Sulit means as a secret, tersembunyi, oleh para pemimpin pergerakan PPM at where? Cebu. Do you see how much this location shows up? Now, who were leaders? Dipimpin oleh Awang Ramli, Murshidi Siddiq, Bujang Suntong. Now, what was the reason for having the Rukun 13? Well, tujuannya untuk menghapuskan. Hapuskan means what? To wipe out pegawai tinggi. The high leaders of the British people in Cebu. And satu mesyuarat, someone meeting, one secret meeting. Mesyuarat sulit. Anything match with the word sulit means secret. Diadakan was created to do what? They were gonna kill someone. They were like, alright, that's it. Murder. Okay, let me write the word. Bunuh means to murder, means to kill. Duncan Stewart. On the 3rd of December of 1949 in Cebu. And did they succeed? Well, they did. See, this led to what we would call the peristiwa. Peristiwa means the event. Sungkit berdarah. Sungkit berdarah. Berdarah means bleeding. So, sungkit berdarah. What happened? Well, your Rosli Dobi. Please remember this name. Oh, I spelled his name wrong. Alamak. Rosli Dobi menikam Duncan Stewart. Alright, DS for now. Duncan Stewart, who's that? Menikam means stab. Duncan Stewart, the guy we mentioned before. Selepas 1 minggu, beliau mati di hospital Singapura. So he was stabbed and he did not die immediately, but he did die a week later in a hospital. So when the British found out, oh, you can imagine, they were not happy with this. British mengambil kesempatan untuk menindas. Means to oppress. You're like, ha, you've left me with no choice. You've forced my hand. So now, I can oppress the anti-penyerahan movement. So, on the 6th to the 7th of December, British, what did they do? Menutup! They closed the pejabat of PPM your Pergerakan Pemuda Melayu, your PKMS, Persatuan Kebangsaan Melayu Singapura, BPS, which is your Barisan Pemuda Sarawak, and your ASAS, which is one we didn't mention before, your Angkatan Semangat Anak Negeri Sarawak. And on the 5th of February 1951, 2 years later, Anthony Brooke merayu semua persatuan anti penyerahan terhenti. Okay, was calling out to the people to stop going against the British. Now, continuing onwards, you need to think about this. We had 3 leaders we mentioned just now, right? So, you can imagine this comes to bite them back. See, Rossley Dobby, which stabbed Duncan Stewart, your Morhidi Sidek, Awang Ramli, dan Bujang Suntung, which these 3 are the leaders that we just said, dikena bersalah. They were guilty and dikenakan hukuman gantung hingga mati. And thus they were charged guilty and were given the hukuman where they hung till they died. Hingga mati. Okay. And anggota lain, that means the other members of Rukun 13 who did not directly involve themselves in the murder of Duncan Stewart, were put in jail. Hukuman penjara. So, can we summarize all that we've learned here? The additional kumpulan of Rukun 13, which I had no place to shove in. These 7 different ways. Persidangan, then having a demonstrasi, giving up your jobs, then the women fighting, and also having their own demonstrasi, using the Akbar, the Utusan Sarawak, writing letters, having the kumpulan 13. Did we succeed in stopping this gerakan anti penyerahan? Did we succeed? The answer is no. Fail. Ini gagal, guys. Okay? Kesannya memberi kesedaran dan membangkitkan nasionalisme. Seeing how this thing failed, it gave awareness to the people and to you as a listener to have the semangat nasionalisme, which is all of what our bab 2 is discussing about. Okay, the unfair justice leads the people to try even harder, led them to create even more political parties. Penubuhan parti politik. And that is all of 4.5 summarized. The next subtopic 4.6 will be a lot shorter, so I will see you there. Thank you.